My name is Elise Carter, and I always believed I was exactly where I belonged. Until my 18th birthday, when everything I thought I knew about myself shattered like glass beneath my feet. You'll finally learn the truth tonight, my sister Morgan whispered that morning, a strange smile playing on her lips as she handed me a small wrapped gift. Just wait. Her eyes gleamed with something I couldn't quite place. Anticipation? Pity? Excitement? Whatever it was, it made my skin prickle. I brushed it off as Morgan being Morgan, always dramatic, always trying to create mystery where there was none. She was 23, 5 years older, and had perfected the art of making everything feel like a performance. But something about the way she said it stuck with me, clung to my thoughts like a burr. Our suburban Seattle home was quiet that morning, rain pattering against the windows. Typical for April in the Pacific Northwest. Mom was making breakfast, pancakes with blueberries, my favorite since childhood. Dad sat at the kitchen island, scrolling through his phone, occasionally glancing up with that distracted smile parents perfect over years of half-listening. "Happy birthday, sweetheart," Mom said, sliding a plate toward me. 18! Can you believe it? She exchanged a look with Dad, something quick but heavy, the kind of glance that speaks volumes between people who've been married 20 years. "Big day," Dad agreed, putting his phone down. "You excited about tonight? The whole family's coming." I nodded, cutting into my pancakes. Yeah, should be fun. The Carter family birthday tradition, dinner, cake, presents, cousins, aunts, uncles, grandparents, the works. Nothing unusual there. Except everything felt unusual. The way Mom's hands trembled slightly as she poured coffee. How Dad couldn't quite meet my eyes. Morgan's cryptic comment. It was as though everyone was holding their breath, waiting for something to happen. By afternoon, I was on edge. I'd received several texts from relatives, not just the usual happy birthday messages, but strange, loaded ones. From Aunt Jenna, "Thinking of you today especially, Elise. Stay strong." From Uncle David, "Big day, kiddo. Call me if you need to talk after." After what? Even my best friend Zoe seemed to be in on whatever was happening. When she came over with a gift bag and a hesitant smile, I confronted her directly. "What's going on? Everyone's acting weird." Zoe shifted her weight from one foot to the other. "What do you mean?" "Don't do that. You know exactly what I mean." Morgan said something about learning the truth tonight. Mom and Dad can barely look at me. Even my relatives are sending cryptic texts. She tucked a strand of hair behind her ear. "Elise, it's not my place. Your parents should be the ones to." "To what? What is happening?" "Just wait until tonight, okay? It's important." She squeezed my hand. "I promise I'll be here for you. Whatever happens. Whatever happens." Like my birthday was some kind of ominous event horizon I was about to cross. By 6 o'clock, relatives began arriving. Grandma Carter hugged me too tightly, her perfume wrapping around me like a cloud. "My sweet girl," she murmured, and I swore I saw tears in her eyes. Grandfather stood back, his face unreadable as always, but there was a tension in his jaw I hadn't noticed before. Cousins filed in, aunts, uncles, all bearing gifts and strange, careful smiles. The house filled with voices, laughter that seemed slightly forced, conversation that quieted whenever I entered a room. At dinner, I barely touched my food. The weight of unspoken words hung over the table like a storm cloud. I watched my family, these people I'd known all my life, exchange glances, whisper behind napkins, watch me when they thought I wasn't looking. After the plates were cleared, Mom nodded to Dad. He cleared his throat. "Before cake, we have something important to share with Elise." The room fell silent. Completely, utterly silent. Dad looked at me, really looked at me for the first time that day. 18 years ago today, you came into our lives, and it was the best day of our lives. Standard birthday speech. Nothing unusual, but his voice cracked on the last word. Mom reached for a large envelope beside her chair, her hands visibly shaking now. "We've wanted to tell you for years, but we decided to wait until you were an adult. We wanted you to have a normal childhood." My heart began to pound so hard I could feel it in my ears. "Tell me what?" She slid the envelope across the table. "You should open this." I stared at it, not wanting to touch it, whatever was inside would change everything. I knew that with absolute certainty. "Go ahead, honey," prompted Grandma gently. With trembling fingers, I tore open the envelope. Inside was a stack of official-looking documents: birth certificate, adoption papers, court records. The name on the birth certificate wasn't mine. "Your birth name was Clara Madeline Winters," Dad said softly. "You were born in Portland. Your birth mother was 16. I stared at the paper, trying to make sense of the words swimming before my eyes. "I'm adopted?" The room was spinning slightly. Faces blurred around me, faces of family members who suddenly weren't my family at all. "There's more," Mom said, her voice barely above a whisper. Of course there was more. The strange behavior, the cryptic messages. This revelation alone didn't explain it. I flipped through the other papers until I reached a newspaper clipping. The headline made my blood run cold. "Infant recovered in high profile kidnapping case." There was a photo. A young couple holding a baby, their faces twisted with grief. The article detailed how their 2-month-old daughter had been taken from her crib in the middle of the night. "What is this?" I whispered, but deep down, I already knew. "Your birth parents didn't give you up for adoption," Morgan said, breaking the silence. "You were taken from them." I looked up, meeting the eyes of the people I'd called Mom and Dad my entire life. "You kidnapped me?" "No, Mom, or the woman I'd called Mom, exclaimed. "We didn't take you. We adopted you legally. We had all the proper documentation. We never knew." Dad continued, his voice hollow. "We worked with an adoption agency. Everything seemed legitimate. We were on a waiting list for 2 years, and then suddenly they called. There was a baby available immediately. We were overjoyed." "We didn't find out until you were 3, Mom said. "The FBI came to our door. The agency had been trafficking stolen children. Most were taken overseas, but a few, like you, were placed with American families who had no idea." I couldn't breathe. The room was too small, too full of people who had known this about me while I remained ignorant. "Why didn't you tell me?" The words scraped out of my throat. "The authorities gave us a choice," Dad explained. "Your birth parents had another child by then. They'd moved on, built a new life. Tearing a toddler away from the only home she'd ever known seemed cruel. The courts decided it was in your best interest to stay with us, provided we maintained contact with your birth family." "Maintained contact?" I repeated numbly. Morgan spoke up again. "Those summer camps I went to without you? Those weren't camps. I was visiting your birth family." The betrayal hit like a physical blow. "You've been meeting them without me? For how long?" "Since I was 13, she admitted. "They wanted to know you were okay. They wanted someone to watch over you." I turned to my parents. No, not my parents. The people who had raised me. Does everyone know except me? Has my entire life been some elaborate lie? Mom reached for my hand. I pulled away. "Not a lie," she pleaded. "We love you, Elise. We've always loved you." "My name isn't even Elise," I said, the realization dawning on me. "It's Clara." "Your birth parents named you Clara," Dad acknowledged, "but we've raised you as Elise from the moment you came to us. That's who you are." But was it? Who was I, if not the person I'd always believed myself to be? "They're here," Aunt Jenna said quietly. "In Seattle. They've been waiting to meet you." That's when I understood the true magnitude of what was happening. This wasn't just about learning I was adopted. This wasn't just about discovering my adoption had begun with a crime. This was about meeting the people whose DNA I carried. The people who had lost me and mourned me. The people who were strangers to me but to whom I was flesh and blood. "Do they want to see me?" I asked, my voice small. "They've wanted to see you every day for 18 years, Grandma said gently. "But they respected the court's decision. They wanted you to have stability." I stood up suddenly, my chair scraping against the floor. "I need air." No one tried to stop me as I walked out the back door into the yard. The rain had stopped, leaving everything damp and glistening under the porch light. I sank onto the steps, my mind reeling. Behind me, the door opened. Morgan sat beside me, not speaking. "Did they tell you to keep it from me too?" I asked after a long silence. "Yes," she admitted, "but I fought them on it. Every year since I was old enough to understand, I told them you deserved to know. I believed her. Morgan and I had our differences, but she'd always been fiercely protective of me, always argued for my right to make my own choices. "What are they like?" I asked. "My birth parents?" Morgan pulled out her phone, scrolled through photos, and handed it to me. "That's David and Catherine Winters, and that's your brother James. He's 16. I stared at the faces on the screen. Strangers with my eyes, my chin, my smile. The woman, Catherine, had the same heart-shaped face, the same dimple in her right cheek. David had my exact eye color, that unusual blue-green that neither of the Carters, possessed. "They seem nice," I said lamely, not knowing what else to say about the people who had created me. "They are nice," Morgan confirmed. "They never blamed Mom and Dad once they understood the situation. They were just grateful you were safe and loved." I handed the phone back, my thoughts swirling. "I don't know what to do with this, any of it." "You don't have to do anything tonight," Morgan said, "but they've waited 18 years. They'd really like to meet you." "Do I have to decide right now?" "Number. But they're staying at the Hilton downtown, through the weekend." I nodded, trying to process everything. Why did everyone have to make it so dramatic? The cryptic comments? The big family gathering? Morgan sighed. "That was Mom's idea. She thought having everyone here would make you feel supported. I told her it would feel like an ambush." She was right. It did feel like an ambush. My entire identity stolen and replaced with another, and everyone watching for my reaction like it was some kind of performance. We sat in silence for several minutes before Morgan spoke again. "For what it's worth, I'm sorry. I wanted to tell you so many times." I believed that too. Eventually, we went back inside. The atmosphere had changed. The tension had broken, replaced by a heavy sadness. Some relatives had already left, sensing perhaps that this family gathering had turned into something else entirely. Mom, Carol Carter, I reminded myself, approached me cautiously. "Are you okay?" What a question. How could I possibly be okay? "I don't know," I answered honestly. "I need time." "Of course," she said quickly. "Whatever you need." I looked around the room at the remaining family members, the only family I'd ever known, even if we didn't share blood. "I think I'd like to be alone now." One by one, they gathered their things and left. Hushed goodbyes, gentle hugs, promises to call tomorrow, until only the four of us remained: Carol, Robert, Morgan, and me. The Carter family. Except, I wasn't really a Carter. That night, I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, my mind a tornado of thoughts and emotions. Beside me on the nightstand sat a small box, the gift Morgan had given me that morning, still unopened. I reached for it now, tearing away the silver paper. Inside was a delicate silver locket. When I opened it, I found two tiny photos, one of me as a baby with the Carters, and one of the Winters family, my birth family, holding a picture of me. Two families, connected by me, yet divided by secrets and circumstances beyond anyone's control. I closed the locket and held it tightly in my palm. Somewhere across the city, my birth parents were probably lying awake too, wondering if I would want to meet them, trying to imagine who I had become in the years they'd lost. Did I want to meet them? I wasn't sure. Part of me was curious, hungry to see the people who had given me life. Another part was terrified. What if meeting them changed everything? What if I felt an instant connection that made my life with the Carters feel like a lie? What if I didn't feel anything at all? Morning came too quickly. I hadn't slept, but somehow I felt more alert than I had in years. Everything around me seemed sharper, more vivid, as if the truth had cleared a fog I hadn't known existed. Carol, Mom, was in the kitchen when I came downstairs, her eyes red-rimmed from crying. "I made coffee," she said, attempting normalcy. I nodded, accepting the mug she offered. "Thanks." We sat across from each other at the table, the silence heavy between us. "I don't know what to call you anymore," I admitted. Her face crumpled. "I'm still your mom, Elise. That hasn't changed." Hadn't it, though? "I want to meet them," I said finally. "The Winters." She nodded, like she'd been expecting this. "I can call them. Or you can. We have their number." I think I should call them. It seemed important somehow to make this connection myself. She wrote the number on a notepad and slid it across the table. "They're good people, Elise. They never blamed us once they understood we didn't know." "That was big of them," I said, unable to keep the edge from my voice. "Considering you got to raise their stolen child?" She flinched as if I'd slapped her. "That's not fair." "None of this is fair," I replied. "Not to them, not to me, maybe not even to you." I took the number and went back to my room. It took me 20 minutes to work up the courage to dial. A woman answered on the second ring. "Hello?" Her voice was warm, slightly deeper than I'd imagined. I froze, suddenly unsure what to say. "Hello," she repeated. "Is this Catherine Winters?" I managed. A pause. "Yes, it is. Who's calling?" It's Elise Carter." I swallowed hard. I guess I was Clara to you." The sharp intake of breath on the other end of the line was unmistakable. "Clara? Oh my God!" I heard muffled sounds. Her calling someone else's name. Movement. "We've been hoping you'd call," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "How are you? Are you okay? Yesterday must have been so overwhelming." "It was," I admitted. "It still is." "Of course it is. I'm so sorry you had to find out this way." Would you like to meet?" I asked, surprising myself with my directness. "We would love that," she said immediately. "Whenever you're ready. No pressure." We arranged to meet at a cafe downtown that afternoon. Neutral territory seemed important somehow. When I hung up, I sat on my bed for a long time, trying to imagine how this meeting would go. Would there be tears? Awkward small talk? Would we feel an instant connection? Or would we be strangers with similar features? Morgan drove me to the cafe. Neither of us spoke much during the ride. She parked across the street, turned to me. "Want me to come in with you?" I shook my head. "I think I need to do this alone." "I'll wait here then. Text me if you need anything." The cafe was busy with the afternoon crowd. I scanned the tables, not knowing who I was looking for beyond the photos Morgan had shown me. Then I saw them, a couple in their early 40s, sitting rigidly at a corner table, the man's hand clutching the woman's so tightly his knuckles were white. Beside them sat a teenage boy who looked uncomfortable in his button-down shirt, like he'd dressed up for the occasion. My birth family. They hadn't seen me yet. I could still walk away, pretend this wasn't happening. But I didn't. Catherine noticed me first. Her eyes widened, her free hand flying to her mouth. She said something to her husband, who turned sharply in my direction. For a moment, we all just stared at each other across the cafe. Then I forced my feet to move forward. "Hi," I said awkwardly when I reached their table. "I'm Elise." Catherine stood, her eyes never leaving my face. "You have my mother's eyes," she said softly, almost to herself. David stood too, his movements careful, like he was afraid of startling me. "Thank you for coming. Would you like to sit?" I slid into the chair across from them, hyper-aware of every movement, every breath. "This is James," Catherine said, gesturing to the boy beside her. "Your brother." James gave an awkward wave. "Hey." I returned the wave, equally awkward. "Hey." "We ordered you hot chocolate," David said, pushing a mug toward me. "Morgan mentioned it's your favorite." The fact that they knew this small detail about me, that they'd been collecting these bits and pieces of my life through Morgan, was both touching and unsettling. "Thanks," I said, wrapping my hands around the mug for something to do. "We don't want to overwhelm you," Catherine began. "We know this is a lot to process. We've waited so long to see you." "What do I call you?" The question tumbled out before I could stop it. They exchanged glances. "Whatever you're comfortable with," David answered. "Catherine and David is fine. Mom and Dad if you ever get there, though we don't expect that." I nodded, grateful for their understanding. "Can you tell me what happened when I was taken?" They shared another look, communicating silently in the way long-married couples do. "You were 2 months old," Catherine began. "It was a Friday night. We put you down in your crib around 8, checked on you at 10 before we went to bed. Everything was normal." David continued, his voice tight. "At 2 in the morning, Catherine got up to feed you and found your crib empty. The nursery window was open. We'd left it cracked for air, but the screen had been removed." I tried to imagine it, the panic, The horror of finding your baby gone. Did they ever catch who did it? Eventually, Catherine nodded. A woman named Elena Mercer. She worked for what appeared to be a legitimate adoption agency, but was actually trafficking infants. She took babies from vulnerable families, or, in cases like ours, directly from homes. She's in prison now, David added, has been for 15 years, but by the time they caught her, you and several other children had already been placed with adoptive families who had no knowledge of the crimes. The FBI gave us a choice, Catherine continued. We could reclaim you through the courts, uproot you from the only home you'd known, or let me stay with the Carters. I finished for her. She nodded, tears welling in her eyes. It was the hardest decision we ever made. But you were 3 by then. You called them Mommy and Daddy. You were happy, well-adjusted. The social workers said removing you could cause profound trauma. So you let me go, I said, trying to comprehend the magnitude of such a sacrifice. We let you stay where you were thriving, David corrected gently. But we never let you go. Not really. We negotiated visitation rights with your sister. We got updates, photos. We moved to Seattle from Portland 5 years ago to be closer, even though we couldn't see you directly. I stared at them. These people who had shaped their entire lives around a child they weren't allowed to know. That must have been incredibly difficult. Catherine wiped away a tear. It was, but knowing you were safe and loved made it bearable. James, who had been quiet until now, spoke up. They hung your picture up every Christmas, right next to mine on the tree. That simple statement hit me harder than anything else. While I'd been living my life oblivious, these people had been including me in their family traditions, keeping a space for me in their hearts. I don't know what happens now, I admitted. This is all so overwhelming. Nothing has to happen right away, David assured me. We've waited 18 years. We can wait however long you need to figure this out. We're just grateful for the chance to meet you, Catherine added, to see the amazing young woman you've become. But how could they know what kind of person I was? They knew facts about me, my favorite drink, my hobbies, my grades, but they didn't know me. Not really. Then again, did I even know myself anymore? The next hour passed in a strange blur of careful questions and cautious answers. They didn't press for too much information, and I found myself growing curious about them in return. I learned that Catherine was a pediatric nurse, David an architect. James played baseball and wanted to study engineering. They had a dog named Milo and a vacation cabin on Lake Chelan. Ordinary details about ordinary people who happened to be my biological family. By the time we said goodbye, I felt both emotionally drained and oddly comforted. They didn't try to hug me, though I could tell Catherine wanted to. Instead, David handed me a small photo album. Just some pictures of our family, your grandparents' cousins, in case you're curious. I took it. This tangible piece of a history I hadn't known was mine. Thank you. Would it be okay if we kept in touch? Catherine asked hesitantly. I nodded. I think I'd like that. Morgan was waiting in the car where I'd left her. How was it? She asked as I slid into the passenger seat. Weird, I answered honestly, but not as terrible as I thought it might be. She nodded, not pushing for details. Home? I hesitated. The Carter house was the only home I'd ever known. But was it still home, now that everything had changed? Not yet, I decided. Can we just drive for a while? So we did, threading through Seattle streets as afternoon faded into evening. Neither of us spoke much. Morgan seemed to understand I needed space to think. Eventually, she broke the silence. What happens now? I don't know, I admitted. Everything's different, but also exactly the same. Are you angry with Mom and Dad? I considered the question seriously. Yes. Number I don't know. They kept this massive secret from me my whole life, but they also thought they were protecting me. And the Winters? They seem nice, normal. It's strange to see my own features reflected in people I've never met before. Morgan nodded. They're good people, Elise, really. Why didn't you ever tell me? I asked, the question that had been burning inside me. All those years, all those visits. She sighed deeply. I wanted to. Every time I came back from seeing them, I'd be bursting with it. But Mom and Dad made me promise. They were so afraid that you'd hate them, that you'd want to leave, that it would traumatize you. And I was just a kid when it started. I could understand that, I supposed. Morgan had been caught between her parents and her sister, trying to do what she thought was right. I'm sorry, she added, for whatever it's worth. By the time we returned home, darkness had fallen. The house was quiet. Mom and Dad had gone out, according to the note on the kitchen counter. Giving me space? Probably. I went to my room, sat on my bed, and opened the photo album the Winters had given me. Page after page of strangers who shared my blood. Grandparents, aunts, uncles, cousins. A whole extended family I'd never known existed. Near the back was a photo that made my breath catch. Catherine in a hospital bed, holding a newborn. Me. My actual birth, my first moments in the world, captured in an image I'd never seen before. I traced the outlines of our faces with my finger. There I was, just minutes old, already belonged to these people who had lost me so brutally. Who had made the agonizing choice to let me stay with the family who had unknowingly benefited from their tragedy. The complexity of it all was overwhelming. That night, I pulled out my laptop and began to write. Not a journal entry or a letter, just the facts, the story, everything I'd learned in the past 24 hours. I needed to see it laid out, to try and make sense of the tangled threads of my existence. I wrote until my eyes burned and my fingers cramped, until the sky began to lighten outside my window. When I finally stopped, I had 30 pages of text, my life rewritten. In the morning, bleary-eyed but strangely calm, I found Carol, Mom, in the kitchen again. You didn't sleep, she observed. Neither did you, I countered, noting the shadows under her eyes. Elise. I met them yesterday, I interrupted. The Winters. She stilled. I know, Morgan told us. They're nice people. Yes, she agreed softly, they are. They showed me pictures. Of when I was born. Of their family. She nodded, waiting. I have questions, I said, lots of them. I'll answer anything I can, she promised. And so we sat at the kitchen table, cups of cooling coffee between us, and began the long, difficult process of rebuilding truth from the fragments of secrets. Over the following weeks, a new pattern emerged. I split my time between the Carter house and occasional visits with the Winters. There were awkward moments, painful conversations, tears from all sides. But slowly, gradually, a new type of normal began to take shape. I learned that family isn't just about blood or legal documents. It's about the people who show up, who make space for you in their lives, who love you enough to put your needs before their own. The Carters had made terrible mistakes, keeping the truth from me for so long, but they had also given me a stable, loving home, had fought to keep me when they discovered the truth. The Winters had made an unimaginable sacrifice, allowing me to remain with the family who had innocently benefited from their tragedy. They had shaped their lives around the hope of someday knowing me. Both families had failed me in some ways. Both had loved me in others. By summer, I had decided not to legally change my name. I was Elise Carter. That identity was real, even if the circumstances of how I came to have it were complicated. But I added my birth name as a middle name, Elise Clara Carter, an acknowledgement of all parts of my story. I don't know what the future holds. College looms ahead, and with it the chance to define myself on my own terms. I'm forging relationships with the Winters, not replacing my relationship with the Carters, but adding new dimensions to my understanding of family. Sometimes I still wake up disoriented, caught between who I was and who I am becoming. Sometimes I'm still angry about the years of secrecy. Sometimes I grieve for the childhood I might have had with my birth family. But more often, I find myself grateful for the strange, painful gift of truth. It's messy and complicated and doesn't tie up neatly with a bow. But it's real, and real is better than perfect. My name is Elise Clara Carter. I am both found and lost, both loved and betrayed. I am the center of a story I didn't write, but am now reclaiming. And that, the reclaiming, the choosing, the building of something new from broken pieces, that is the truest definition of family I know.